For centuries now, spontaneous human combustion has perplexed the human race. Even the greatest minds in science can't explain how or why people will sometimes just randomly burst into flames from within their body. More often than not, spontaneous human combustion kills its victims, leaving nothing but a pile of ash and bones. And the scariest part is, since we don't understand, well, anything about it, we can't predict when it's gonna happen or who it's gonna happen to until it's too late. Thank God it's Freaky Friday. Today we're going to be discussing the bizarre phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion. Before we get into this episode, I just want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible, Magellan TV. The queen of all streaming services, Magellan has thousands of documentaries on so many different genres and weird, interesting, creepy topics, and of course a lot of true crime. I watched so many true crime documentaries on there. I recently watched one called The Black Heart Diaries, which was all about this serial killer from South Africa who used to pretend to be a taxi driver and lure in women into his car and then kill them. He did that like with 17 victims. And in this documentary, they actually go into the prison where he's being held. Is he on death row? Maybe he's not on death row. Maybe he's just doing a life sentence. But they go into the prison and they interview him and they talk to him. And I always find prison interviews so interesting, especially because there's been like a lot of cool down time since they committed the crime. I'm always so interested to hear from them how they feel about what they did. It's just so weird to have like a face-to-face interview and footage of the actual serial killer. That doesn't happen often, so I really enjoyed this one. Magellan TV are always bringing out new releases just like this one. In fact, they bring out between 15 and 20 hours of new content every single week. So there's essentially no end to the entertainment. And Magellan are very kindly giving you guys a special offer when you click the link down below in the description of this video. Trust me, I love their service so much, and I have done for years. I still haven't got on board of it, and I know that you guys won't either. So thanks again to them for sponsoring this video. Love Magellan TV. Can you tell that I thought that was going to be for a true crime video? Because now we're back with the purple lighting. Anyway, quickly before we get into the actual cases and the theories and everything, I just want to let you know that today's video will cover some sensitive topics. So of course, viewer discretion is always advised with my videos. While we make every effort to fact check all of our sources and make sure all of our information is correct, no action should be taken in reliance upon the information in this video. All opinions that will be stated in this video are mine and mine alone. And with that being said, thank God it's Freaky Friday. Let's get into the spontaneous human combustion episode. This has been a debate, like I said, for centuries. People can't decide if spontaneous human combustion is actually a real thing or if it can be explained away through other theories. Can human beings actually just burst into flames out of nowhere, like from within the body? There do seem to be a lot of instances, hundreds of cases reported, in fact, of this exact thing happening. But how and why does it happen? Like I say, science says that spontaneous human combustion isn't a real thing and there's always something else that can explain it. Like maybe there was an electrical surge, or maybe there was a spark that came off of a match or a lit cigarette, or even one of the theories that I've heard is that alcohol, drinking a lot of alcohol, having that flammable liquid inside your body can, I don't know, make you set on fire out of nowhere? That doesn't sound right to me. There have been some other theories throughout the years, some slightly less logical ones, like it's witchcraft, or it's the wrath of God, God punishing sinners on earth by just instantly making them burst into flames. Or, my own personal favourite theory is that there is no explanation for these spontaneous human combustion cases. Maybe this is just an extremely rare phenomenon that can happen from some sort of chemical reaction that happens inside an otherwise perfectly fine body. It's a hot topic, literally, yeah. And I've always been interested in stories of spontaneous human combustion. I bet that doesn't surprise any of you that the true crime girl is also interested in reading about weird deaths. Like, even going back to when I was a child and I first heard of spontaneous human combustion, it was a very genuine, real fear of mine. Kind of like what people say about quicksand. Like, remember when we were kids and we thought that quicksand was gonna be like a bigger problem for us to deal with in our adult lives, but now that you're actually an adult, you you've never come across quicksand in your life. Spontaneous human combustion was like that for me. It was one of those things where I first heard about it and then I didn't stop thinking about it for months, if not years. I was terrified that I was literally just gonna like go to school one day and just burst into flames at my desk. So naturally, now that I'm a weird, creepy adult with a weird, creepy YouTube channel, of course I have to do a Freaky Friday episode on spontaneous human combustion. So in this video, I'm gonna go into some specific case studies. We're gonna talk about some theories. We're gonna talk about some patterns that are seen across a lot of spontaneous human combustion cases that makes me think it's a real thing. As much as scientists say that they can explain it away with like different things each time, I think when there's a pattern, you've got to acknowledge that. But there's a lot of patterns between the cases that we're going to talk about today, and a few of the cases actually took place like around Christmas time, which is how I'm going to argue that this is our Christmas special episode, hey. So let's start with a mad one, shall we? Not a Christmassy one, but the first case that I want to talk about, the victim burned so intensely that it actually burned a hole through the floor and he fell through it. He was a 92-year-old man named John Irving Bentley. He was, of course, retired at this point in his life after a long, successful career as a family doctor. On one freezing December morning in 1966, a maintenance worker was making the rounds in John's neighbourhood, checking everyone's electrical meters. When he got to John's house, he knocked on the door and no one came. But this worker, knew John. He'd been the electrical meter reader in that area for a lot of years. So he knew that this was a 92-year-old man who lived alone. So when he didn't come to the door, he panicked a little bit. So he actually tried the door and it was open. So he let himself into the house. And as soon as he walked inside, this maintenance guy noticed a very neat pile of ash on the floor. It was about 35 centimeters high, and above it, in the ceiling, was a big hole surrounded by glowing embers. He said that the room was filled with this like blue-grey smoke, and there was a sickly sweet smell lingering in the air, like flesh had been cooked. So immediately this meter reader guy panics because he knows that this is an elderly man's home. There's clearly been some sort of fire and he doesn't know where John actually is. So he starts making his way through the house, shouting for John, but John doesn't shout back. There's no response whatsoever. And then when he reached the second floor of the home, he finally found John, or what was left of John. Laying next to the burning hole in the floor was the bottom half of John's leg, with the slipper still on the end. That was all that was left of this man. His walking frame was found leaning on the side of the bath, almost as if he'd kind of been using it when whatever happened. Maybe he was resting it there while he was doing something else. His bathrobe was also found in the bath, partially burned. So that was the scene that they had right now. And immediately I have so many questions. So John burned so badly that pretty much his whole body turned to just ash. But how could his leg have not been a part of that? How could the fire have not touched his leg? Hardly at all. I mean, it was burned, but nowhere near what the rest of his body was. The rest of his body was complete ash. There was hardly even any bones left. So for there to still be intact, like flesh and bone and muscle in a slipper just confuses me so much. If the rest of the fire had been like right here, how did it not catch to his leg? To just one leg as well. The other legs seem to have been completely incinerated, yet one leg totally fine. I also really question how this fire didn't spread anywhere else. I mean, it was so powerful, it was so hot that it burned through the floor, but somehow the rest of the house didn't catch on fire. Nothing else went up in flames, just John. There was like no fire damage to the rest of his house. I mean, other than, of course, the hole that burned in the ground. But that was it. Nothing else had burned. Some theories for his death from people that don't believe in spontaneous human combustion. I mean, I kind of do. Maybe I do believe in it, so I kind of think it was that. But people that want to give it a reasonable explanation say that maybe John had a box of matches in his pocket that kind of, I don't know, caught fire somehow. So some kind of friction in his pocket, it catches fire, it sets him on fire, and not the rest of the house. This would kind of explain why his bathrobe was a bit burned. There's another theory that John was a pipe smoker, and so maybe like something fell out of his pipe and caught onto his robe. I guess that is a pretty good theory, but if it was the pipe ash or if it was a matchbox or something, how on earth did not a single other thing in that house catch fire? Even his robe was only a bit burned. It hadn't caught fire. And clothing tends to be flammable. It tends to catch fire and engulf in flames pretty damn easily. So I'm just very confused. John Irving Bentley's case is one of the very popular ones that people talk about when it comes to spontaneous human combustion, even though a lot of people do theorize that it can be explained with the pipe ash or with the matchbox. I don't know. The next case study that I want to talk about is actually of another older man. This time it was a retired firefighter named George Mott. Much like the last case, no one was around when George Mott set on fire. So it makes it kind of hard to debate what could have caused it. For a few of the cases of spontaneous human combustion that we're going to talk about, some of them did have witnesses, which is crazy to me. Like, someone was just standing there and they saw another human being just instantaneously burst into flames. But unfortunately, for these two men's cases, there were no witnesses whatsoever, so it makes it really hard to think what could have happened to them. But again, when George Mott's body, when his remains were found, it was practically the exact same as John Irving Bentley, just without the foot. He was just a pile of ash and a few bone fragments on the floor. What once was a fully functioning, grown adult man was now a pile of ash. And once again, just like with the last case, the rest of his house was completely untouched by the fire. These kind of cases, the reason that I think they are quite believable is because the fires seem so contained to the person that is suffering. It really does seem like the fire starts and ends like within the person. I believe George Mott died in his bedroom, and there were a couple of things that seemed affected by the fire but not burned by it. So a part of his TV was a little bit melted, like the fire, like the heat of it must have melted the plastic a little bit. But what was interesting was there was a box of matches just a few feet away from where the pile of ashes was. So he was burning insanely hot right next to a pile of matches, a box of matches, that never caught alight. And that can happen with matches, I'm pretty sure. Like, they can catch just from extreme heat nearby. So again, it's a very interesting one. The fire that killed George Mott seemed very localized to him. It didn't spread to his house, it didn't affect anything. His bed sheets were right there. They never caught on fire. The burns that George himself sustained, I mean, the burns, it was one complete giant incineration. But this is what I'm trying to say. It was very comparable to what happens to a dead body in a crematorium. It's a very similar effect. It must have been a very similar temperature, which is a high temperature. More intense than any fire that you could ever, like, accidentally get in your home, you know? And when coroners get cases like this on their autopsy table, they never quite know what to categorize the death as. Because technically, spontaneous human combustion isn't really recognized by science. Or maybe the phenomena is recognized, but they can't explain it. So a lot of coroners are reluctant to put that on the death certificate, thinking that there must be another explanation. But you'll see later on in this case that has been on a lot of people's death certificates. The first case that we talked about, John Irving Bentley, his death was categorized as asphyxiation. So just like suffocating in the smoke, I guess. And then there was a note next to that said that his body was also 90% burned, as if that wasn't clearly like the cause of death. That's just really interesting to me, that they can label it as asphyxiation when his body was literally burned to ash. Like, how is... I don't get it. I mean, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a coroner, I don't get it. But to me, if I see a dead body that is just a pile of ash, I'm gonna say there was some sort of fire Like I said, not a professional, but something tells me there was a fire. Cases of spontaneous human combustion have been reported since as far back as the 17th century, the 1600s. And there's literally hundreds of cases that have been reported. There's hundreds of times that people believe this has happened. And reports likely increased in 1852 when Charles Dickens released his rather famous novel, Bleak House. It's a fictional story, and in it there's a man called Mr. Crook, who spontaneously combusts. He dies. He just erupts into flames and dies. And think about it. This was the 1850s. People were not that clued up on science and biology, I guess. And so this book, even though it was fictional, Charles Dickens made this shit up. He thought it was an interesting story. But this book goes out and suddenly everyone's thinking, holy shit, we could all set on fire at any point in time right now. At the time, Victorians were getting quite scared about like drinking too much alcohol and stuff like that because Mr. Crook, in the book, was an alcoholic. And as I said before, alcohol is believed to be one of those reasonable explanations for spontaneous human combustion. But the alcohol theory really doesn't work for me. It's just not cutting it, mate. Because even the drunkest of drunk people would not have a blood alcohol concentration high enough to make them flammable, like to make a human being just flammable from their blood. Even if you got like a really, really effing drunk person and lit a match and like put it on them, it would just kind of burn their skin. They wouldn't like catch fire. I think there's about the same chance of setting a drunk person on fire as there is a completely sober person. So to me, the alcohol theory, as much as it kind of makes sense in theory, like, you know, alcohol is a flammable liquid. If you have loads of it in your body, maybe you're more likely to catch on fire. But in practice, I mean, clearly, it's been tested. Has it been tested? Maybe not in the way that I just kind of explained it to you, where you get a drunk person and you put a match on their arm. But people that have looked into spontaneous human combustion, people that are scientists and biologists that are a bit more educated than me, have said, nah, that like won't work. That don't work. So naturally, when the science of something doesn't quite add up, people start to come up with other explanations, like paranormal ones or religious causes for tragic deaths like this. They want to be able to explain it, but they can't. And that is where a lot of supernatural things come in. And especially in the Victorian era, at the time that this book came out and spontaneous human combustion was like a conversation, people were very devoutly religious in Victorian England especially. And at that point in time, it was a real fear of the devil. And I guess it does kind of sound like something straight out of the pits of hell. Like Satan himself heard that you were sinning, so he magically just burnt you to a crisp. People believed that there were a certain set of traits that could make you more likely to fall victim to spontaneous human combustion. And at first, when I was writing this script, I was like, this is so silly. Like, it kind of happens to anyone. As you're going to find out through this video, there's a few different types of people that it's happened to. But no, like, the more I did my research, the more I was like, damn, maybe they kind of had a point. Because a lot of victims of spontaneous human combustion are older people, 60 plus. I mean, it does happen to younger people, but more often than not, it's older men. And it's true that it seems to happen to a lot of alcoholics. But based on the case studies that we've gone through in order to, like, research for this video, it does seem that anyone could actually fall victim to this. And the next case study that I want to talk about is actually of a baby. And I will say that the baby survived, is still alive today, so if that was gonna like scare you or put you off listening to this, I mean, it is still a really heart-wrenching thing to think about and talk about, but I did want to let you know before we even get into it that the baby survived. Rahul Kannan was born in Tamil Nadu, India, and by the time he was just 3 months old, he'd already burst into flames on 4 separate occasions. The first time this ever happened, his mother was just in the next room over, and all of a sudden, she hears her baby screaming bloody murder. And I am not a mother myself, but I have heard that there are very specific like baby cries and baby screams that just kind of kick you into your maternal instincts. His mother was dealing with her other child at the time, so she didn't like immediately drop everything that she was doing to run. She was trying to rush and finish whatever she was doing with this kid, and all of a sudden her neighbour runs into the house and screams, "Your baby is on fire!" So they all rush into Rahul's bedroom. The mother mother, the father, and the neighbour. They managed to grab a towel and put out the fire, so Raul was fine, although very burned. They took him to the hospital, managed to get him treated. Everything was as okay as it could be coming out of that. They thought that this was just some horrific freak accident that they had been very lucky to come out of alive and well. But over the coming months, this just kept happening. It happened 3 more times after that. Imagine the most traumatic event that they had probably ever been through. They felt so lucky that they actually still had their son in their arms. Imagine them being subjected to that another 3 more times, having that fear that you could lose your loved one 3 more times in 3 months. But like I said, Raul survived every single one of these, which is insane. This is some miracle, baby. And while the family were beyond grateful that they still had their son, they didn't have much else left, actually, at this point. They had become social outcasts because everyone in their village in India believed that this was happening to them for a reason. Either they were sinning or, maybe it was like witchcraft or something. One of those kind of supernatural beliefs. I don't know specifically what it was that they believed about the family, but people didn't want to get close to them. And also, people were fearing that Raul might just, I don't know, burn their house down. I don't know, people didn't want to hang out with them. Of course, they took their son to see plenty of doctors and nurses, and they all struggled to figure out why this baby just keeps catching on fire out of nowhere. It was so confusing. One doctor eventually theorized that it could be because Raul was giving off combustible gases out of his paws. He was just radiating combustible gases. Although even the doctor himself said he wasn't fully sure on that. The only real advice that he could give this family was keep your baby away from anything flammable. Keep him away from any open flames, because if he is just a little combustible little human being, then fucking hell, you gotta be really careful, haven't you? They even kept a big bucket of water next to his crib for months and months and months, just in case they needed to kick into action and save his life again. But actually, after that 4th time, it never happened again. And like I say, he's still alive today. Crazy. And that's one of the only cases that we came across where someone has survived spontaneous human combustion over and over again. But it is also one of the very few cases that I've heard of this happening to a child, especially a baby, a newborn baby. It really does seem that spontaneous human combustion happens more in the elderly. That's a lot of the case studies that we're going to talk about today. Our next case study is of a 78-year-old man named Young Sik Kim. Mr. Kim lived in Honolulu, Hawaii, and he had been paralyzed from the waist down for most of his life, so he got about in a wheelchair. And one day, in December 1956, Mr. Kim was home alone when flames literally just erupted out of his stomach. He began to scream out in pain, and luckily one of his neighbours wasn't too far away. As soon as she heard his distress call, she came running. By the time she actually got into Mr. Kim's home, he was completely engulfed in flames from head to toe. And it was blue flames too, you know, those super hot ones where they're hardly even visible yet. That seems to be a case with a lot of spontaneous human combustion cases that have been witnessed by another person. They'll say that the flames are very blue, very very hot flames. This neighbour called for the fire department because she felt totally powerless to be able to help Mr. Kim on her own. But unfortunately, by the time firefighters got there and the flames died out, Mr. Kim, along with his wheelchair, had been completely incinerated. Everything was just ash. Actually, I lied. There was one thing that seemed to survive the fire. His feet. Once again, his feet. Both of them this time. In the case of John Irving Bentley, it was just one. It was from his knee to his foot of just one of his legs. This time, both of Mr. Kim's feet remained intact and just a bit burned. They weren't burned up. They weren't turned into ash. They were just a bit charred. And this is what I mean when I say there's a lot of freaky patterns and coincidences across these cases. How is it that 2 different times a victim's feet have managed to survive such powerful, such searing hot blue flames? It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, how, How? If everything else is engulfed in flames, how is it not catching to the feet? Again, with this case, the rest of the house was barely touched by the fire. And this all happened in a room that had like loads of books and like piles of clothes in it. Everything around him was flammable, but nothing caught fire. Police and fire investigators were totally baffled by this case. They had tried to find, like a reasonable explanation somewhere where a spark or a flame could have come from, but there was nothing. There was nothing near Mr. Kim that could have started that fire that day. And even still to this day, around 70 years on, Mr. Kim's death remains a huge question mark, and it's talked about a lot when we talk about spontaneous human combustion. I'm really sorry, I'm trying not to say that whole phrase all at once this often, but I can't help it. It's actually also kind of fun to say. But I actually want to circle back to the foot thing again real quick, because the next case study that I want to talk about, again, her feet survived. Why? How? Don't get it. I really don't get it. And actually, I've just realised the age of this woman as well. She was 67. As I was saying earlier, it seems to be in people 60 plus that this happens to the most. So many freaky coincidences. Anyway, this next victim was 67-year-old Mary Hardy Reeser. And one day, her landlord came, I guess to speak to her, I don't know, came to her apartment. And when they knocked on the door, they realised that the doorknob was so hot to touch. The landlord went inside and found Mary's remains after she had presumably combusted. All that was left of her was a pile of ash, her spine, and her left foot, with a slipper still on it. And when the landlord got there, the room was still filled with smoke, so it mustn't have been long since the fire died out. And of course, what do you know? There was minimal fire damage to the rest of the apartment. The fire was once again localized to the human being, and it didn't spread out. It's pretty common in these cases that the only kind of fire damage that can be found at the scene is either like right above or right below the victim. So say if they were sat in a chair, like the back of the chair might be all burnt up, or like the floor where their feet were, that would be burned. And, that does seem to happen in a lot of these cases, and that's it. But I really wonder what it is about feet and why they don't seem to catch fire when the rest of the body does. Maybe it's because of their distance? I guess, yeah, with a lot of these cases where there's a witness, they will say that the flames erupted, like, from the stomach. It always seems to, like, come from the middle outwards. And I guess if the flames are kind of travelling up, does fire travel upwards? I'm not entirely sure. I don't know. Your feet are quite far away, and they're quite small, and mine are quite cold. I've got quite bad circulation, so maybe that would have something to do with it. I don't know. Or maybe it is something to do with the shoes that they have on. Maybe people's slippers are, like, fire resistant, and that helps to protect the feet, but nothing else. Oh, actually, maybe I've just figured it out. Maybe I've actually just cracked my own theory. As we were researching for this video, I was actually really surprised at how many spontaneous human combustion cases happened within, like, the last couple of decades. Because, I mean, I know a lot of the case studies that we've spoken about have been, like, really, really old stories, but I kind of expected that because it does seem like some like woo-woo thing that happens that we just don't understand. And it makes sense that as we advance more and more with science and technology, we kind of understand what it is more. I say that, but I know that we don't understand what spontaneous human combustion is. But I don't know. To me, it made more sense that in the Victorian era, when that Charles Dickens book came out, it made sense to me that they were all panicking and like recording these cases and stuff, even when it could have been explainable. But no, like, we came across like quite a few that happened in the 2010s and shit like that. It's really shocking that something like this can happen with the science and the knowledge that we have now, and still there will be the smartest professionals in the world looking at it going, beats me, I don't know what's happened here. And actually, it's one of these more modern cases that is also one of our Christmassy themed ones. It's hardly Christmassy, it just kind of happened around Christmas, but whatever, this is your Christmas episode, enjoy it. Just a few days before Christmas, in 2010, a 76-year-old man named Michael Faherty was found dead in his home in Galway Island. Now, he wasn't a pile of ashes like a lot of the other cases were. When they found his body, it was still rather intact. I mean, it was very, very burned, it was very charred, but it wasn't ash, it was still intact. When his body was found, he was found like laying face up on his living room floor. And what's interesting was, his fireplace was only a few feet away from him, And the fire was lit at the time. Now, I know what you're thinking. There's your explanation. That is a reasonable explanation, that maybe he caught fire on the fireplace and maybe that's how he died. And maybe you're right, you know? Maybe you are right. Fine. But official fire investigators would disagree with you. They don't think that it was the fire. They concluded that the fire in the fireplace was very well controlled. Like, it wasn't flailing and spitting and, like, sparking out. And there was no other fire damage in the house. I guess if the fire had kind of, like, spread, you would know, wouldn't you? Plus, Michael was, like, a good few feet away. I know he was still, like, relatively close. But they said that it was just very unlikely that the fire could have set fire to Michael, but nothing else. Again, with this case, there was no fire damage to the rest of the house. That's what sells it for me every time. When the fire is so insanely hot that it incinerates a human being to ashes, yet nothing else is affected, that's when I'm gonna start believing your theories, your woo-woo spontaneous human combustion theories. And it was actually Michael Faherty's death that was legally recorded as spontaneous human combustion on his death certificate. This is what I was talking about earlier, and this was in 2010. I find that very mad that in the modern day that is a legally recognized cause of death, even though we don't understand it and we can't even prove that it's a real thing. It's just horrifying that we don't know where it comes from, we don't know why it happens, yet it is legally recognized to have killed this man out of nowhere. I feel like through this video I'm gonna, like, re-trigger that fear that I had in school, you know, when I felt like I could just burst into flames at any point. Now I'm very much realizing that spontaneous human combustion is very real and very scary. And it doesn't help that I do actually have another Christmassy combustion case to tell you about. You know what, maybe Christmas is just like a busy period for fires? I don't know. And this one's actually a super old case from 1885. A woman named Matilda Rooney lived and worked on a farm with her husband and a ranch hand. On the night of Christmas Eve, all three of them had been up, drinking, celebrating, and then that night, Matilda and her husband went to bed on their first floor bedroom, and their ranch hand went to bed on the floor above them. But in the early hours of the morning, the ranch hand woke himself up from his sleep in, like, a bit of a coughing fit. He was hacking, he was coughing, but then he, like, managed to calm himself down, sort himself out, and he just went back to sleep. But when he awoke the next morning, literally Christmas morning, he found soot all over his pillow, and he was very confused. So he got up to investigate. Of course, the first place that he goes is Matilda and her husband's bedroom, but when he pushed open the bedroom door, all he saw in that room was Mr. Rooney laying on the bed, dead. And it wasn't immediately obvious how he had died either. He was just out cold, no pulse, not breathing, dead. And his wife, Matilda, wasn't laid in the bed next to him, so immediately the ranch hand knows that he needs to go and find her, he needs to make sure that she is okay. So immediately he starts running around the house trying to find Matilda, and when he ran down to the kitchen, he saw something very bizarre. Not Matilda, but a 3-foot hole burned into the wooden floor of the kitchen. I think underneath the kitchen was just like a basement or just like an underspace or something. And when he peered over into this hole, all he saw was a pile of ash and bones. You guessed it, Matilda Rooney seemed to have spontaneously combusted in the kitchen and burned to death in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve. This is how they woke up on Christmas morning. Well, this is how the ranch hand woke up on Christmas morning, finding everyone else in the house dead. Once her remains were removed from the underspace of the house, it was found that there was actually a bit more than ash and bones. Would you believe me if I said that her feet had survived? Her feet were intact! Nothing else was. They were badly burned, don't get me wrong, but every single other part of her body, her clothes, everything had burned. Even most of her bones had burned to ash. There weren't that many bones left in this pile, but for some reason, her feet in her shoes were intact. The medical report that was done on Mr. Rooney found that he had died of smoke inhalation. So that makes sense. I think the ranch hand was just very lucky that his bedroom was on the next floor up, because of course he woke himself up in the middle of the night hacking and coughing, probably from all that smoke. Had he been any closer to the source of the fire, to Matilda Rooney, then the ranch hand probably wouldn't have survived either. People that don't believe in the phenomena have said that Mr. Rooney probably killed his wife and then killed himself. And to that I say, what? How does that theory check out? If he died of smoke inhalation and she died of giant fire, it don't make sense to me. She burned to an absolute crisp, and it just... Anyway, I'm going to leave that because I don't believe it, and I'm not going to give it a single second more and more time. An urban legend that went around their village at the time, and you know what? It sounds kind of fun to be like a maiden in an 1880s village just gossiping about, like, well, I don't know, gossiping about death, that's not cool. But the gossip in the village was that Matilda Rooney had suffered divine punishment from God. God had killed her, burned her, incinerated her because she had drank too much alcohol on Christmas Eve. And this was her punishment. So be careful this Christmas, everyone. Ease off the Baileys, lest you be burned to a pile of ash. Another case that I found really interesting, and at this point I am going to start just like very quickly summarising them because they are all very similar, aren't they? But this one was of a 61-year-old woman named Jeannie from London. She was just sitting in her kitchen one day when her brother noticed a bright flash of light, and when he turned round he saw his sister sitting there with flames erupting from her stomach and from her mouth. I actually have a quote from her brother. He said, "The flames were coming from her mouth like a dragon and they were making a roaring noise. Her clothes didn't burn much at all." Which is just so confusing. Jeannie was on fire. Fire was coming out of her human body, yet she was burning inside unburned clothes. It don't make sense to me. Her brother confirmed that there was nothing around them at that point in time that could have possibly started this fire. And he also said there was quite a distinct lack of smoke. I mean, there was smoke, but not as much as he would have expected for a fire like this. Just a very peculiar fire. Jeannie actually survived the fire at first. The fire was put out, she was transferred to hospital, but she fell into a coma and died a few days later as a result of her injuries. People have tried to explain this one, saying that maybe the cardigan that she was wearing was flammable, maybe, I don't know, friction or something made it so hot that it just like sparked and set fire. I don't know, at this point, even I am not believing the theories that I am trying to word to you. Like, that just don't make sense to me, especially because her brother said that her clothes didn't seem to burn at all. You can't convince me that the cardigan started it. The Taylor Swift cardigan is fine. And I also think about the way that her brother described it, like it was just this sudden, huge, like, flash of raging fire. He said that he, like, saw the flash before he noticed anything else about this fire. Before his sister started screaming in pain, before he felt the heat, he saw a big flash, almost like an explosion, like this woman exploded. So again, it don't make sense to me. It couldn't have been just like a little small spark in a cardigan that kind of grew into a bigger fire. It was just all of a sudden there. Some people suspect a theory called the wick effect. Now it kind of makes sense to me. Fine. As much as I do kind of want to believe in a really strange, unexplainable phenomenon, this kind of explains it a bit. It links in with the flammable clothing thing. The theory is that, like, if your clothes catch fire, then as the human body starts to burn, our fat melts and our fat acts as fuel for the fire. So say her cardigan did somehow set on fire. Her brother says there's no way it could have done that, but say there was a box of matches next to her, one of them lights, it catches onto her cardigan. If she hadn't been wearing the cardigan, it would have burned out much quicker, but because she was wearing the cardigan, it was heating up her fat, melting her fat, and then the fire started burning off of her fat. And you know what? This does make a lot of sense to me, because as I've been saying, the fires always seem so localized to the person, they never seem to spread. Well, that makes sense now. If the person themselves is the fuel of the fire, it's not gonna spread. Well, maybe it would spread. I don't know, but I'm kind of closer to believing it once I learned about the wick effect. I was like, oh, we are just giant candles. This could explain why it always seems so concentrated on the stomach, because I guess I know I carry a lot of my fat on my stomach, hey? And maybe that's why it doesn't reach the feet as much, because your feet tend to be a bit like bonier. There's less fat on your feet. Wait, wait, I've solved it. No, guys, it's not even funny. I actually think I've just cracked it. And I'm a little bit disappointed because, like I say, I like to believe in things that aren't explainable. There is another theory that we came across as well that I think is interesting. It's worth talking about. This one's from a British biologist named Brian J. Ford. He says that if our body cells are starved, like sometimes during chronic illness this happens, or even just like a really intense workout, if your body cells are starved, they will start to produce acetone. Now, acetone is a very highly flammable substance. If you've ever had like nail polish remover, that's made of pretty much entirely acetone. So I guess if our cells are really starved, they're producing a lot of acetone, it makes it more believable that a human being could just catch on fire from like a rogue spark off of a... Ow, why did I do that? You know, like if they had a box of matches in their pocket that accidentally caught on fire, if your body just happens to be producing loads of acetone for whatever reason, then it makes sense that you could set on fire. Oh, actually, Baby Raoul's doctor might have had a point. Maybe those were the combustible gases that were coming out of his pores. That's a really weird way to word it though. Maybe he should have worded it this like acetone way. When Brian J. Ford put forward this theory, he actually did a test where he made these like full-scale human models with pork tissue inside. Obviously it's like unethical to use human tissue, so he used pig. And he soaked a lot of this tissue in acetone to kind of replicate what it would be like to have human tissue exuding a lot of acetone. He dressed up these big like pork models in like normal human clothing, relatively flammable clothing, and he set them all alight with just a little flame, and within like half an hour they'd completely burned up. They had completely incinerated. So maybe that's proof of the theory, perhaps? And the reason he believed that a lot of feet seem to be left over in cases like this is because our feet just have less fat on them. They do tend to be a bit more bony. So actually it's a bit of a double whammy. Less fat means less fuel for the fire, and less cells in general down there means less acetone. And while both of these theories do seem really promising, both the wick theory and the acetone theory, the one thing that I just can't quite get behind is both of those theories require an external fire source to make the victim catch fire, you know? Both of those theories say that there has to be a spark, or like the person has to just be like exceptionally flammable for whatever reason and walk by a fire or some shit like that. And in a lot of these cases, especially where there's witnesses will say there was no fire. There was no way that that person could have caught fire. It's just a very interesting one. Like when I first started researching for this video, I was like, oh yeah, I'm really excited to like finally get to the bottom of this weird little background fear that I've had in my head since I was a child. And I came out of the research even more confused than when I went in. I do not know what is going on. Like I said, science officially doesn't think that humans can actually just randomly catch fire from within their bodies. But what do you think? I'm really, really excited to read the comments on this one because I still kind of want to believe in spontaneous human combustion, as awful as a phenomena as it is. I just kind of like to believe in those weird, freaky, unexplainable mysteries of life. I think that's what makes life and being a human on this earth so interesting, that we don't know everything. We can't comprehend everything that is happening around us. I kind of like it when science can't explain things. Like, a lot of people find that unnerving, and I get that, but I find it rather mystifying. Life is no fun without urban legends and folklore and gossip and, you know, all that kind of shit. Theories, supernatural, like, that's what gives me the fire in my soul. Didn't even mean to do a pun. Pun not intended. But in the same breath as all of that, I am very fucking scared of spontaneous human combustion. I can't lie. And making this video has only made me 10 times more scared, which was not the aim. But thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know if you enjoyed it. This has been a bit of a different Freaky Friday episode for us, actually, where we're testing out this kind of format of loads of mini stories within like one bigger theme. So yeah, let me know what you thought of this one. I really enjoyed looking into this one. And if there's any other like weird, unexplainable things about life that you want us to dig into, you know I'm your girl. You know I love that kind of shit. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like or leave a comment, engage with it in some kind of way. That helps YouTube to realize that people like my videos and people want to watch my videos, and then they'll push them out further, and that would mean a lot to me and the whole team. We're really excited about this series, and I can't thank you all enough for the responses that you've been giving and for just tuning in every other Friday when we come with some other weird random story. I'm so glad that you're all here for it. Thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. Remember, if you click the link down below in the description of this video, there's a special offer for you guys, so go find your new favourite true crime documentary over on Magellan. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, maybe watch another one. There'll be another one on screen for you to click right now. Or if you want to subscribe to my channel, I suggest you do. We post videos every single week. Then you can click the circle with my face in. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Bye!